Hello friends, welcome to our channel, Ammu and You. I am Ammu and I love narrating stories. I've been narrating stories for kids, a little older kids, and now I thought, why not? For everyone. We all love listening to stories. Today, I have a beautiful story written by an amazing author, an all-time favorite, Guru Rabindra Nath Tagore. The story is The Lost Jewels. This is a story where the narrator is narrating the story himself. He says, "My boat was moored beside an old bathing ghat of the river, almost in ruins. The sun had set. A huge house with broken windows, tumble-down verandas, and all the appearance of old age was in front of me. I sat alone on the steps of the ghat, which were cracked by the far-reaching roots of a banyan tree. A feeling of sadness began to come over me, when suddenly I was startled to hear a voice asking, 'Sir, where have you come from?' I looked up and saw a man who seemed half-starved and out of fortune. His face had a dilapidated look, such as is common among my countrymen who take up service away from home. His dirty coat of Assam silk was greasy and open at the front. He appeared to be just returning from his day's work and to be taking a walk by the side of the river at a time when he should have been eating his evening meal. The newcomer sat beside me on the steps. I said in answer to his question, 'I come from Ranchi.' 'What occupation, sir?' 'I am a merchant.' 'What sort?' 'A dealer in cocoons and timber.' 'What name?' After a moment's hesitation, I gave a name, but it was not my own. 'And where do you wish to stay?' Pointing to the tumble-down house above the ghat, I said, 'There.' I found that he was the schoolmaster of the place. From beneath an enormous bald head, his two eyes shone out from their sockets with an unnatural brightness in a face that was thin with hunger and illness. The schoolmaster said, "Nearly 10 years ago, when I came to this place, Bhushan Saha used to live in this house. He was the heir to the large property and business of his uncle Durga Shah, who was childless. Bhushan Shah was a modern, urban modern. He had a beautiful wife. Mani was the name of Bhushan's wife. She used to get her caresses without asking, her Dhaka muslin saris without tears, and her bangles without being able to pride herself on a victory. In this way, her woman's nature became atrophied, and with it her love for her husband. She simply accepted things without giving anything in return. Her harmless and foolish husband used to imagine that to give is the way to get. The fact was just the contrary. The result of this was that Mani looked upon her husband as a mere machine for turning out her Dhaka muslins and her bangles. So perfect a machine, indeed, that never for a single day did she need to oil its wheels. Now, suddenly, a tangle occurred in Bhushan's complicated business. For some reason, he found it difficult to get credit in the market. If the rumor got about that he was borrowing in the market, where he was very well known, Then he feared that his business would suffer even more seriously. So he began to cast about to see whether he could not raise a loan from some stranger. But in that case, he would be bound to give some satisfactory security. The best security of all is jewelry, for that saves the signing of all sorts of complicated documents. It not only saves time, but a very simple process it is. So, Bhushan went to his wife, and unfortunately, he was totally powerless to just say, "Look here, I'm in need of money. Bring out your jewels." But he could not broach this subject with such direct conversation. He conveyed it with extreme delicacy. When Money set her face hard and said nothing to it, he was deeply hurt. Yet he was incapable of returning the hurt back to her. He thought, if my wife, of her own free choice, is unwilling to trust me with her jewelry, then I have no right to take them from her by force. Now, all this jewelry had been given to Money by him. He had got a box of jewels, and Money was someone who knew nothing but jewels. The source of happiness for her was only wearing gold, and the box of jewels had made her supremely happy. She wore all the jewels, every possible jewel that she had on her body all the time. That was her only job through the day. So she knew nothing else to do, even with the jewels, not even to allow her husband borrow them at the time of need. Her husband also, Bhushan Saha, had always admired her being decked up like that. And so when he even remotely suggested the need of the jewels, Money got flustered. She became disturbed and she called her counselor for consultation. Some cousin of hers was engaged as assistant steward on Bhushan's estate. He was not the kind of man to profit himself by dint of hard work, but by the help of his position in the family, he was able to save his salary and even a little more. Money called him and told him what had happened. "Imagine, my husband wants my jewels," she said. "Now, what is your advice?" He shook his head wisely and said, "I don't like the look of things at all. The fact is that wise men never like the look of things." Then he added, "Babu will never be able to raise the money, and in the end, he will have to fall back upon that jewelry of yours. And who knows, probably that was the reason that he always gifted you so many jewels." From what she knew of humanity, she thought that this was not only possible, but very likely too. She had no child to love, and though she had a husband, she was almost unable to realize his very existence. All that mattered to her was herself and her jewelry. So her blood froze at the very thought that her only object of love, the wealth which, like a child, had grown from year to year, thanks to her husband, was to be in a moment thrown into the bottomless abyss of trade. She gasped. What then is to be done? Modhu, a cousin, said, why not take your jewels and go to your father's house? In his heart of hearts, he entertained the hope that a portion, and possibly the larger portion of the jewellery, would fall to his lot by befriending this woman. Money at once agreed. It was a rainy night towards the end of summer. At this very ghat, a boat was moored. Money, wrapped from head to foot in a thick shawl, stepped into the boat. The frogs croaked in the thick darkness of the cloudy dawn. Modhu, waking up from sleep, roused himself from the boat where he had promised to be waiting for her, said, give me the box of jewels. Money replied, not now, afterwards. Now let us start. The boat started and floated swiftly down the current. Money had spent the whole night in covering every part of her body with her ornaments. She was afraid that if she put her jewels into the jewel box, they might be snatched away from her hands. But if she wore them on her person, then no one could take them away without murdering her first. She could not even think of the thought of having to let go of her ornaments, her jewels, when she was alive. Money did not understand Bhushan, it is true, but there was no doubt about her understanding of Modhu. Modhu had written a letter to the chief steward of the estate that he had started to take his mistress to her father's house. The steward was a loyal one, and he immediately, angrily informed Bhushan about this sudden happening. But as for Bhushan, when he got to know about this, when he ought to have been angry, he was only distressed. After 10-12 days, having secured the necessary loan, Bhushan returned home, very well imagining that Money, after completing her mission of visiting her father, had by this time come back home. But to his dismay, he found the door of his room shut. He knocked, no one opened the door. Breaking the lock, he entered the room and saw that it was empty. He was very surprised. Where could his wife be? His old Brahmin steward, however, came to him and said, you ought to get some news of the mistress. Acting on this suggestion, messengers were sent to Money's father's house. The news was brought back that neither Money nor Modhu had turned up there. Then a search began in every possible direction. Men went along both banks of the river making inquiries. The police were given a description of Modhu, but all in vain. They were unable to find out what boat they had taken, what boatman they had hired, or by what way they had gone. Bhushan Saha was in complete doubt. He was lost. He loved his wife, and he did not know how to get her back and from where. One day, in the dead of night, when the heavy rain had ceased and the songs of the village opera troupe had become distant, Bhushan was sitting there in front of the window, looking out in the dark. Suddenly, a jingling sound as of ornaments was heard. It seemed to be advancing up the steps of the ghat. The sound reached the top step of the bathing ghat and now began to come towards the house. It stopped in front of the door, which had been locked. Bhushan was not able to sit still another moment. He stood before the closed door. He banged it with a force, shaking the door, and the sound woke him up suddenly. He found he had been asleep. His whole body was wet with sweat. His hands and feet were icy cold, and his heart was fluttering like a lamp just about to go out. The next night, having extinguished the light, Bhushan took his seat at the open window of his bedroom, again like the previous day. The sky was dark with rain clouds. Just as the night before, a clattering and jingling sound came from the ghat by the river. Bhushan was all ears. The sound of the ornaments gradually advanced from the ghat and entered the open door. It was now only just on the other side of the threshold. Bhushan could no longer contain himself, and his pent-up excitement burst forth in one wild cry of "Money!" And he sprang up from his chair with lightning rapidity, thus startled out of his sleep again. He found that the very window panes were rattling with the vibration of his cry. Bhushan struck his forehead in despair. Next day, Bhushan gave orders that night no one should sleep in the house except himself. The servants thought that the master was going to practice some mystic rites. All that day, Bhushan fasted. In the evening, he took his seat at the window of that empty house again. He was sitting there with his head resting on the back of his chair and was gazing up at the stars. Just then, the sound came from the river ghat, just as on the other previous nights, and advanced up the steps. Bhushan's heart beat fast. His whole body trembled. But this time, he did not open his eyes till he could not keep them shut anymore. He opened his eyes. He saw by the faint light of the crescent moon that there was a skeleton standing right in front of his chair. It had rings on all its fingers, bracelets on its wrists, and armlets on its arms, necklaces on its neck, and a golden tiara on its head. In fact, its whole body glittered and sparkled with gold and diamonds. The ornaments hung loosely on the limbs. Most dreadful of all was the fact that the two eyes which shone out from the bony face were living. Two dark, moist eyeballs looking out with a fixed and steady stare from between the long, thick eyelashes. Then the skeleton, fixing its gaze upon the face of the motionless Bhushan, silently beckoned with its outstretched hand, the diamond rings on its bony fingers glittering in the pale moonlight. Bhushan stood up as one who had lost his senses, and followed the skeleton out. The skeleton crossed the veranda and, winding down the pitch-dark spiral staircase, reached the bottom of the stairs. Making their way through the flitting fireflies which haunted the dark, shadowy path, they reached the river ghat. The skeleton descended to the river, and Bhushan, following it, placed one foot in the water. The moment he touched the water, he woke with a start. His guide was no longer to be seen. Bhushan slipped and fell headlong into the river. The next moment, he was plunged into eternal sleep. Having finished the story, the schoolmaster was silent for a while. Suddenly, the moment he stopped, I realized that except for him, the whole world had become silent and still. For a long time, I also remained speechless, and in the darkness, he was unable to see from my face what was its expression. At last, he asked me, "Don't you believe the story?" I asked, "Do you?" He said, "No, and I can give you one or two reasons why. In the first place, Dame Nature does not write novels. She has enough to do without." I interrupted him and said, "And in the second place, my name happens to be Bhushan Saha." The schoolmaster, without the least sign of discomfiture, said, "I guessed as much. And what was your wife's name?" I answered, "Nityakali." Nityakali was her name. Friends, I hope you like the story. Like all his stories, this one was a beautiful one, is a masterpiece and an all-time classic. Many of you would have read it too. I felt like narrating it, and I hope you have liked enough to like, share, subscribe to the channel. And I will come back to you again with more and more wonderful stories. Thank you so much for watching. Bye for now.